is blasphemy of the Holy Spirit for today? That's what we first got to say. Can we blaspheme against the Holy Spirit today? If we can't, then I'll be done. Because if we can't, if it's not for today, then there's no use even talking about it. But if it is for today, then we must talk about it. I believe we can blaspheme against the Holy Spirit today. But we first got to build a foundation. And that foundation is on the forgiveness. We got to look at forgiveness. Is it God's forgiveness or man's forgiveness? Well, it's God's forgiveness. We're not looking at man's forgiveness. Wouldn't be a big deal if it was man's forgiveness. Anybody ever say to you, "I'll never forgive you"? Okay. That's not a big deal. I'll go hang out with somebody else. But we're talking about God. If God says, "I'll never forgive you," whoa, there's nowhere else to go. There's no other God. He's it. So this is pretty serious. We have a major problem if God says that. Some churches teach that suicide is the unforgivable sin. I don't think it is. I think suicide can be forgiven. One, because if we start to list sins, if we start making a list of sins and say, well, suicide, you'll never be forgiven by suicide. What about drunk driving? What about adultery? Are those forgiven? You see, now we're taking the focus off of God's forgiveness and we're putting it on man. And we can't do that. In Judges 16, Samson committed suicide. And he's listed in Hebrews in the Hall of Faith, along with Abraham, Moses, and King David. I'm not saying that there's not any consequences. There is consequences to sin. If you're thinking that, if you're sitting there and you're wondering, boy, have I committed this unforgivable sin? Have I blasphemed against the Holy Spirit? Just the fact that you're concerned about it tells me that you have not committed blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. If you committed blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, you wouldn't even care. Your heart would be so hard that you wouldn't care if you committed it.